yes, the first thing I found, I had to ask myself was, well, when could ophthalmologists even see the retina so that they could make the diagnosis? And that was, as you said, Hermann von Helmholtz designed the ophthalmoscope in 1850. It published a book in 1851. Technology spread all around the world within a decade. I mean, there were atlases being made in the 1850s with drawings, and eventually photography. But 23 years went by before the first cases of macular degeneration were published, which is 1874. There was 4 cases published by an ophthalmologist in London. But I'll just say that between 1851, when the disease was first discoverable, and 1930, there was only no more than about 50 cases of macular degeneration in all of the world's literature. And by 2020, there's 196 million people with macular degeneration, maybe I'll call it AMD, and expected to be 288 million people with AMD by 2040. So as Lisa has there, I didn't know this, now 20,000 diagnosed every day. And of course, yeah, we now have 1 in 3 people over the age of 75 in most developed nations with AMD, like in the United States. That's true. And 1 in 11 over age 50. So yeah, and this is also the leading cause of irreversible vision loss and blindness in people over the age of 50.
It's your central vision. Your macula is what we are pointing whatever we want to look at. And when you have a disruption in those that tissue, you get a big blurred spot, and then everything outside of it is not in focus because our main 20/20 vision is at the macula. That's why you see in this simulation the rest of the letters on the outside are not clear. It's only the what you're looking at with the macula that would be clear. So, and it's really terrible as far as being able to, people say, I just want to look at my grandchild's face. And you look at the face and all you get is that blurred area. And it becomes very debilitating as it progresses.
That to this day, and I left practice 8 years ago, but to this day, it breaks my heart when I think of the patients that I had that did lose central vision to this, and they could no longer, some of them could no longer work. They could no longer see their grandchildren's faces. And this is heartbreaking. There's times, I'm sure you've experienced this too, because we just see so much macular degeneration today.
Yeah. And it's what makes me really want to cry is the fact that it's preventable. And it's also, you can halt the progression of it, but it's not happening. Why? Because all these eye doctors out there, and I'll show you a little bit further later in this video, that it's not that they're maliciously not trying to heal you. They just are ignorant of the information.
This is 20 nations where we had data on vegetable oil consumption going back at least 25 years, because the incubation period of macular degeneration is obviously at least 35 years. You don't see it in almost anybody under 35. And it's generally speaking more like 50 years or more. But anyway, so this is only the nations where we had 25 years of data or more on seed oil consumption or vegetable oil consumption versus the prevalence of macular degeneration in that country. And so on the x-axis, the bottom, you can see the increasing vegetable oil going to the right, and then on the y-axis, the AMD prevalence as you go up. So it increases as you go up. And you can see that there's a pretty tight correlation. In fact, for those statistically minded, the Pearson correlation coefficient, which is on this graph, is R 0.78. That is a very high correlation between vegetable oil consumption and AMD prevalence. So this is strongly supportive of the hypothesis. Virtually all of the chronic diseases like coronary heart disease, cancers, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, dementia, Alzheimer's, macular degeneration, all of them tend to track with this graph right here. And this is total vegetable oil consumption in the United States. And if you go back to 1865, in this graph, you can see that we had 0 vegetable oils. And so 100% of added fats in the diet came from animal fat. We just didn't have any vegetable oils. There was trivial amounts of olive oil. Almost nobody could get olive oil even at that point. And so cottonseed oil entered the food supply in 1866. And you can see that by even in 1900, there was only about 1 to 2 grams of vegetable oil per person per day. So 99% of added fats came from animal fat. And then you just see that now we got all the other vegetable oils came into the food supply, and the consumption went from 0 in 1865 to 80 grams per person per day in 2010. 80 grams a day of vegetable oil is 720 calories. That's 32% of US caloric intake. So the vegetable oils almost completely supplanted and replaced animal fats. And with that, we became obese and sick. And we developed just a multitude of all of these chronic diseases. And so this graph shows the vegetable oils in the black curve versus the heart disease deaths in the red. See that heart disease deaths drop off more recently in treatment of heart disease, bypasses, maybe stents, but more than anything, probably it's a reduction of smoking. This is a graph of obesity in the red curve for those who are seeing this versus vegetable oils in the blue. And we go clear back to the 19th century. So in 1900, obesity at least in men age 18 to 80 was 1.2%. That's Scott Allen Carson's work. And obesity steadily increased, probably, but anyway, it eventually got to 13.4% by 1961. And then we've just steadily increased all the way to 42.5% by 2018. But notice there's just a striking correlation with the vegetable oils.
And I can imagine that there could be a graph of rheumatoid arthritis tracking with the vegetable oils, and cancer tracking,
It does. They all do.
And strokes, and you name it. Eczema and psoriasis. We could go on and on. It's so inflammatory and so poisonous and so toxic to our bodies. But the big issue is the incubation period. Nobody's dying next week, next month from this. So everybody's just laughing and eating their French fries and, all their processed food. Like what's the problem?
So for those who think that, it's about carbohydrates or sugars or something else, it's really about processed foods. And first of all, processed foods are really refined flours, refined sugars, and vegetable oils and trans fats, basically. That's it. Sugars during that approximate period, it was actually 1961 to 2014. Sugar, but everybody is blaming sugar, but sugar between 1961 and 2014, sugars were only up 20.2%. But from that same period, 1961 to 2014, vegetable oils globally increased 322%. That's 4.22 fold. And of course, during that same time, we've just had an explosion of obesity, overweight.
One of the issues that comes up is the fact that these dang seed oils, they linger because their half-life is, there's varying documentation of it, but about 680 days. And,
right.
when you consume if we all stop right now, today, 680, so let's just call it 2 years from now, only half of it has exited our body. And then another half-life, which is another couple years, so 4 years out, half of that, so another quarter leaves our body. And
that's good news for people, because if you go on an ancestral diet today, which means you eliminate processed foods, you eliminate sugars, refined flours, and vegetable oils, and it's a little more complicated than that, but just for the sake of simplicity, that you do those things, and then 3 years later, you may have turned over all of your body fat. The picture shows one little boy, who's smoking a cigarette, or he's about to, it looks like, and which I think would kind of sicken all of us if we see this. We just think this is the most horrendous thing. And then opposite that little boy is another little boy, that with a big plate of French fries in front of him, which we think of as normal, or I think most, most Westerners do. This is acceptable around the world, but the reality is that that plate of French fries those oils will be incorporated into that little boy's body fat, and he cannot get rid of those for probably at least 3 years, right? So this will poison him for years, whereas even a person who's been smoking for 20 years, when they give up smoking, that increased oxidation, which is what causes the damage, is gone after 1 year. Ancestrally living populations who smoke, but who do not get heart disease, and they don't get cancers, and they don't even get COPD, to my knowledge. And I give it a quick example, like the Catawbans, that were studied by Staffan Lindeberg back in about 1990. And they were on a completely ancestral diet. Catawba is in a South Pacific island, and they consumed coconut, fish, starchy tubers, and fruit, but the smoking prevalence is right at about 80%, and they don't get those diseases. There was no heart disease at all, and there's no mention of any lung disease.
It's incredible.
So diet protects you. One of the reasons that French fries are so dangerous, or anything that's fried in these vegetable oils, is the fact that when you heat vegetable oils, they accumulate these advanced lipid oxidation end products, or ALs. And one of those ALs is acrolein. Acrolein is the toxicant of cigarette smoke that makes cigarette smoking so harmful in terms of carcinogenicity. Martin Greatfeld of England, a lipid researcher, did these studies where they analyzed French fries for these advanced lipid oxidation end products, and one of those being acrolein. And they determined that a large size French fries, 154 grams, which is the equivalent of a large French fries at McDonald's, contained 1 to 1.5 milligrams of acrolein. Well, that is equivalent to smoking up to 97 cigarettes.